Public comments. Is there anyone wishing to address us this morning? All right, we'll move approval of minutes.
So moved.
Second.
I had three. You get your choice. We'll call for action. Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Consent calendar.
Move approval.
Second.
Have a first, have a second. Any discussion? Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Regular agenda items, legislative update.
You hurry up, we'll be done before the boss gets here.
Well, yeah, I'm working. I'm trying to help Newell.
Good morning, Commissioners. There is a lot of AV news coming out of Washington, D.C. So as you'll see in your agenda packet, the House approved the Self-Drive Act related to autonomous vehicles, and yesterday the Senate Commerce Committee, which also manages transportation, approved unanimously their AV START Act for autonomous vehicles under 10,000 pounds, so not heavy trucks. And I was just trying to read a quick update from our federal lobbyist this morning right before the meeting started, because things have been progressing really quickly with that. But in general, we like this bill. We think it's a step in the right direction towards establishing kind of a regulatory framework. It's very similar to the House bill. And some of the things that we like about it are there are a few technical committees that are established as part of the legislation. And what that does is it invites U.S. DOT-approved proving grounds like Momentum Station to sit at the table with policymakers so that the folks on the ground who are actually deploying the technology are informing the people who are making the policy on it. In the past, there's been a little bit of a disconnect. There's also a section in there on consumer education, and again, inviting practitioners and people on the grounds and folks from the proving grounds to be part of a working group in how you educate the public about advanced driver systems and moving towards automated systems. So there's some good education pieces in there. The League of Cities did have some concerns with some language in there that talked about how state and local laws could not place an unreasonable restriction. I was looking for the exact language on autonomous vehicles. And that was very vague. And I was just reading this morning that it appears that that language has potentially been removed to avoid giving the league any additional heartburn over that. So that seems to be working its way out. So overall, we'll be keeping our eyes on it as it goes to the Senate floor. But I think it's a step in the right direction. Some of you may have also seen yesterday we made an announcement that NHTSA gave us approval, a waiver actually, to test the Easy Mile shuttles on the public roads within the Bishop Ranch Business Park in San Ramon. So kind of there are three phases of testing for that project. The first phase was to test the shuttles at Momentum Station to make sure they were performing properly. The second phase was to take them out to Bishop Ranch and test them within the parking lot to see how they do with other traffic and cyclists, etc. And we actually started that phase in March. And then the third phase will be to take those shuttles and run them across the street within Bishop Ranch in mixed traffic with cyclists, pedestrians, and other vehicles. And that third phase requires kind of a two-part approval. A waiver from NHTSA, and then the second approval from DMV, which was part of the statute of AB 1592. So we're actively working with DMV right now, and we hope to have their approval shortly, within a month, maybe, fingers crossed. And then, when they've approved the testing plan and everything else, it's possible that we could start that phase of testing as early as next year. So that's really exciting news. We did send out a press release about it yesterday. Randy did a few interviews. I think once DMV gives us their approval, you'll start to hear a lot more about it, since that's kind of the final piece of that puzzle. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions before I turn you over to Mark, who has a lot to report on the state side. Nope. Okay, take it away, Mark.
Excuse me. Thank you, Commissioners. I'm happy to be here. It's always nice to get out of Sacramento. Just quick update on two bills we're watching and waiting for the governor's action on. The first, obviously, would be SB 595, which would enact the Regional Measure 3 program, allow the measure to go to the ballot. No real indication. We're running close to the governor's limit to take action, which would be October 15th. So that's coming up quickly, so I expect to see something, obviously, between now and the 15th. No real indications which way they're leaning, but I know MTC is hard at work trying to get that measure approved. The other bill builds on the report by Lindsay. It's AB 1444 by Assemblymember Baker, which would authorize a shared autonomous vehicle pilot program within Dublin. The idea there is to allow access, the last mile solution access between residents in the area, residential areas within Dublin, and some of the parking facilities to connect with BART. There had been some opposition within the administration, but I participated in meetings with Governor's office with Ms. Baker's staff, and I have every reason to believe there'll be no reason to veto it. One of the issues that have been hanging over it, and I'll be quick about this, has been the DMV regulations. The governor did sign a bill that reduced the time between the issuance, public notice that the regulations are available, and the effective date. The original statute governing AVs had given it a 160-day period between the DMV final notice and actually being able to use it. The measure reduced that down to 30 days, and that bill was approved. So I think that's lent some uncertainty as to the need for the bill. For example, if now with that bill signed, if the DMV regs came out within the next couple days, they'd be effective and the bill would be moot. But there's no indication that the DMV is ready yet to issue the regs. A lot of pressure has been put on them to get them out, but still no indication at this point. So as a backup, the bill presents an opportunity in case DMV slides on their goal of getting their regs out this fall. So that's that. I want to just briefly retouch and recapture what happened on the cap and trade since the last time I was here. At that point, they had approved legislation to spend nearly $2.5 billion in the 2017-18 budget cycle. 60% of that was funding available through continuous appropriations, or 60%. Let me back up. There were two components to the funding that was available, about $800 million that was carried over from last year, plus about $1.5 billion of new revenues from the August auction. That combined to 2.5, rounded up a little bit. 60% of the new money went under continuous appropriations to programs for transportation like the Transit and Intercity Rail program, affordable housing and sustainable communities programs, and the two transit components. So that money was preordained. That left $1 billion available for expenditure in an expenditure plan. The legislature waited until they returned from their summer recess and were able to produce a bill that spent nearly $1 billion in 17-18. The lion's share of the funding goes to reducing diesel emissions more than anything else. In addition, it targets low-carbon transportation components. There are other components for agriculture, and some funding went to some of the local air districts, but by and large, the almost preponderance of the funding was put into diesel reduction and low-carbon transportation. The next step in cap and trade is to deal with the post-2020 years. With the extension beyond 2020 approved earlier this summer, they left that expenditure plan for post-2020 alone. So 2018 will be the governor's last chance to shape up what happens post-2020. And I think that's something we'll likely need to be very engaged in to make sure that transportation gets its more than its fair share of that 2020 and beyond funding. I thought I'd brief you on the two initiatives that are out there that would wreak havoc with SB1. The first was one submitted by Assemblymember Travis Allen, who is also running for governor on the Republican side. He's a Assembly member from Huntington Beach. His measure simply repeals every single section, with one exception, every single section of the of SB1. He got into a situation where the Attorney General's title and summary, which a lot of us worked with the Department of Finance and the Attorney General's office on to help shape. He didn't like the way it came out, but he was successful in going to court and having the court agree with him, and it was rewritten. What had been missing was any reference to taxes. What the Attorney General had originally written talked about the elimination of programs, because that's in essence what it does. But it also does repeal the taxes, so the new title and summary does reflect the word reduction of taxes and fees in the new title and summary. That'll go on the petitions. He hasn't received that yet. He'll have a go-ahead shortly. I think the Attorney General may want to protect their discretion in writing titles and summaries, so they may challenge that, which would delay the ability to collect petitions longer. So we'll see how that plays out. That's not been determined yet. In addition, we got word that the Republican delegation within, or the Republican members within the California delegation in Congress were working on an initiative, and sure enough, within a couple of days of that, I think it's been 2.5 weeks now, they did submit an initiative. In essence, it too does repeal SB1. It says any tax that, any new taxes on vehicles or fuels would be subject to voter approval, and retroactively goes back and says, and that includes anything done in 2017. So it does repeal it by virtue of that language, that look-back language. Some folks say, well, it's just giving the voters a chance to vote on it, but it repeals it and then gives you a chance to put something on the ballot at a later date. That measure, we're in the early stages of, there's a group called Fix Our Roads Coalition that was behind SB1. They are driving what they call a dissuasion campaign. They've been engaging with the members in Congress, and then the members in Congress have been engaging with them through the media and directly. And you may have seen some articles to that effect. We have a meeting with the legislative analyst on Tuesday to talk about the fiscal impacts and the programs that would be affected, and that would be followed again with another meeting with the Attorney General to help them, from our perspective, draft their title and summary in a way that would be beneficial for those who might be opposed to it. So those are the two initiatives out there. The Republican congressional delegation proposal is probably 2 months behind the other one, but they would face the same time frame of having to submit by April in order to meet the November deadline. So we'll see how that turns out. Finally, a local homegrown issue is kind of erupting in the Bay Area, and that is the plan by MTC to impose requirements on the RTIPs being developed shortly. The CTC did adopt the 2018 STIP guidelines, and now MTC's come forward with a plan for a carrot and stick approach to promoting housing development in the region to meet the needs of the area. Essentially, they would identify those communities that have been not meeting RENA measures in different categories, and on the one hand, they would offer some of the region's STIP money to those that do, but also withhold RTIP projects from those that are failing to meet RENA standards. So it is a new issue. It's coming to the MTC board this month, and it really is a shame because the STIP dollars are fairly limited. They're very, very flexible. And if you recall, within the last 2 years, the CTC had to drop nearly $1 billion out of the STIP. And so now under SB1, you're able to start putting projects back in that have been cut out. And now there's going to be this potential imposition of a carrot and stick approach to who gets to have projects programmed. So I wanted to bring that to your attention and see if you have any direction. There's not much we can do in the way of legislation between now and the end of the month, but it's something that management wanted to be put on the table for your consideration.
Questions? Julie?
I'll start with a question and then I'll give you a little better news. In your memo, and thank you for your update, at the top of the 6th page of your memo, it's the second page of your memo, but 13-6, talking about SB 595, you phrase it, the bill requires the 9 Bay Area counties to conduct a special election. I think it's permissive, is it not?
I apologize, it is.
Okay. Because that took me by surprise, and I thought, is there something we missed in all those days that we were up there lobbying on this thing?
No, what I neglected to include was if MTC adopts and moves forward,
right,
each county is required. So.
Exactly. Yeah. So, okay, that's good. So there's no decision made on that. I can tell you that I think fairly safely that the temperature of MTC, though we haven't talked about it formally, I think the temperature of MTC toward the toll increase would be to put it on the ballot if we do it as a phased approach, probably starting at $1 and maybe a couple years later another $1, and then maybe by year 5 it would get up there. But I think we all sense that the odds of it passing as a $5 increase or a $3 increase are very, very slim. The other issue about the STIP dollars, this was brought to me and to a couple of others who serve on the CASA effort, and CASA is the Committee for Affordable and Sustainable Accommodation. That's what the acronym stands for. It's basically how do we get more housing. And this is kind of a coalition of folks from the Bay Area Council, Silicon Valley at Home. There are a whole bunch of folks on it. I serve as president of ABAG. Chair of MTC is on it as well. But the executive director of MTC briefed us on this idea a couple of weeks before our meeting last week with CASA, before the first meeting, and ran it up the flagpole, and most of us started to tear it down right there and said, wait a minute, we had a map of the Bay Area of the communities that don't meet the criteria. Concord is one, Martinez is another. That's not helpful for 240, for SR4 and 680. And I pointed out, I said, wait a minute, most of our STIP money this time is going to state highway projects. We can't allow a single city to stand in the way of those. We'll find a way to get you an exemption. And in the room was a supervisor from Alameda County who said, wait a minute, we have a project on 880 and Newark doesn't qualify either. Are you going to tell us we have a gap because the area next to Newark won't? Now we'll find a way to do an exemption. So somebody from the North Bay raised an issue and said, but, and they said, yeah, I see what you're talking about. We'll figure it out. Well, since that, he's got a lot more blowback. So I think he realizes that this was not ripe. And I have a feeling that the MTC board will act upon it in a way that will make it better. But I can't promise anything because I certainly haven't talked to everyone. But the key people that I have talked to who are leaders are not enthusiastic about this strategy. So, of course, at the CASA meeting, when it's raised, all the housing advocates think it's wonderful. but I think the blowback from the cities and everybody else is not going to be as good. And the other challenge, of course, is that STIP money is unpredictable. I mean, we've had years of zero for 6 years in a row, and then we get a little bit of a windfall now, but it doesn't make up for all the gaps that we've had where we didn't have anything. So it's a very unpredictable source of money if you want to put it toward housing. And it wouldn't be to build housing, it would only be for the transportation improvements affiliated with the housing. So anyway, I think we're going to be okay there, but your Contra Costa delegation will be making sure our voices are loudly heard. And along with Alameda, we've been pretty strong. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mark, regarding SB1 and the efforts perhaps to repeal it, I'm interested in knowing a little bit more about the interaction with respect to projects getting funded, what the effective date of SB1 is currently, and whether, some project, the fact that these initiatives are out there potentially garnering signatures and possibly getting on the ballot for some future date, will that basically kill any funding until that gets resolved?
It's full speed ahead in Sacramento at the commission and the administration. They're moving forward. The first taxes get collected in November. The CTC has either finalized all their guidelines or will be finalizing the last remaining elements, and they'll start call for projects in the discretionary programs and start money flowing. For example, the local streets and roads money would start flowing as soon as cities and counties submit their project reports. So it looks like it's full speed ahead. And in addition to that comment, the Caltrans will be bringing forward a very major allocation plan for bridges. The rumor is they may be bundling bridges, small projects, into larger packages at this meeting coming up in 2 weeks, presuming that the funding is going to be there from a programmatic sense so they can get going when the money does flow. So, as I said, it's nobody's taking the foot off the throttle at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like the plastic bag ban that when that initiative qualified to repeal that, they could no longer enforce the change pending that outcome.
Yeah, it's interesting. The technique of use, they were the proponents of the repeal. Normally on a statute, you'd have the ability to referendize it, which would, once it qualifies, it stops everything going.
This is not a referendum.
But this is an actual repeal initiative, so different thing.
It would behoove us, though, if we think there's a risk there that this measure might have some legs to be moving full speed ahead and getting our projects shovel-ready and up for funding before somebody pulls the plug on this.
Absolutely, and I think that'll help the case come election time if we're able to actually show progress. I mean, it's taken since April till now to get everything in line, but I think in terms of the process and procedures and call for project stuff, but I think there's been no slowdown in preparation for projects ready to go as soon as the money flows.
That's good to hear. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Questions, comments? Back to Sacramento.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just a quick comment. I've seen this presentation, support it. We can't pave our way out. I have that other meeting I have to get to. It's just down the street. I apologize.
Need to hear this presentation now. We've just heard from you.
But it's also just information. It's good to know. It's really about we can't pave our way out of the problem because we tried that. We are now at a place where innovation is going to help us. So, and I really appreciate Tim's work on this.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. My name is Tim Hale, the Deputy Executive Director for Projects, and we're here today to give you an update on Innovate 680. We're really excited about the project. And through public workshops and online feedback when we were developing the countywide transportation plan, in central and southwest counties there was concerns about congestion on 680. And so CCTA commissioned a report called the I-680 Transit Investment and Congestion Relief Study that looked at strategies to solve congestion on Innovate 680 and essentially developed 7 strategies, and that evolved into 4 projects. And what's exciting about this project is that it's never been done before, and Innovate 680 will be the first connected corridor in the Bay Area. So Innovate 680 is a regional project. This is all of our partners along the corridor, and to make sure everyone is involved with the project every step of the way, we're going to be developing a policy advisory committee and technical advisory committee, and we'll be going to the RTPCs in January to look for recommendations for those committees. So 80% of the vehicles in Contra Costa end in Contra Costa, and 47% actually start in Contra Costa. And so what this slide tells us is that as Contra Costa County continues to grow, congestion will continue to get worse on the 680 and also the 24. And so we're not going to be able to build ourselves out of congestion. So we need to look for innovative ways to solve our congestion problems in Contra Costa. And most of the trips end in Contra Costa, so if not all, and 100% are actually on the 24. So what is the problem? Well, the 680 is the 8th worst commute in the Bay Area. The corridor is very transit poor. There's lax local express bus service between the Dublin and Walnut Creek, and there's just a lack of physical space to really do any major improvements. And to do any major improvements would require, multi-billions of dollars to do anything significant to improve congestion along the corridor. And if we don't do anything, congestion is going to continue to increase and going to quadruple and increase over an hour by the year 2020. So CCTA has already been investing money into the corridor. We've already improved the auxiliary lanes through Danville and San Ramon. MTC is improving the express lanes through Danville and San Ramon, and those will be open in October. And CCTA is completing the southbound express lane project. We'll start construction in early next year. So outside of these key capital improvement projects, how do we solve congestion on 680? So through an integrated approach, Innovate 680 would really maximize the efficiency along the corridor through technology and become the first connected corridor in the Bay Area. And how do we do that? The first step is to establish goals. So the goals of Innovate 680 is really to look at person throughput, create mode shift, provide shared mobility options, and really focus on first and last mile connectivity. So the 7 strategies that were developed for the project is cool the corridor hotspots. So look at weaving and bottlenecks along the corridor, complete the express lanes in Contra Costa County, increase bus operation services, innovate operational strategies, prepare the corridor for the future, first and last mile connectivity, and transportation demand management. So weaving causes friction and congestion along the corridor. So through the study, we identified 2 hotspots in the corridor at Livorno and North Main Street. And so when too much friction occurs along the corridor, such as at this location, Lawrence Way and North Main Street, you end up with a lot of friction and causes congestion. So at this particular location, we're looking at a braided ramp configuration, which eliminates the weaving and improves congestion. And this is just one of the strategies that we'd be looking at along the corridor to cool our hotspots. The next strategy is to complete the express lane. So right now at the 680-24 interchange, there's a gap in our HOV system, and that's mainly because of the geometrics at that location. And so what we need to do is we need to complete that gap and then extend the express lanes to the Benicia Martinez Bridge. We also need to increase transit services in the corridor. So through this strategy, we want to, right now there's only about 1 to 2 buses that serve the corridor per hour. And so we want to increase transit services and increase those buses to about 6 per hour. We also want to provide reliable transportation for buses by using a bus-on-shoulder concept. So that way it gets the buses out of congestion and it provides better reliability. So innovative operational strategies is really a two-prong approach. It's looking at next-generation integrated corridor management, and this system would actually be able to use real-time data and adapt to real-time conditions on the corridor. It'll actually be a learning system that will actually be able to predict how the freeway will be operating and make corrections to the active traffic management system in real time. It'll also include coordinated adaptive ramp metering. So what that means is that the ramp meters will be able to talk to each other along the corridor. And so in other words, if there is one particular ramp that's got a long queue and another ramp that's got a short queue, it would hold the short queue ramp for a little longer and then clear out the other queue on the longer ramp. So we also want to prepare the corridor by the future to implement dedicated short-range communication systems to enhance connecting the vehicles to the infrastructure. An example of this is that the bus that's operating in the shoulder will now be able to communicate to the ramp meter, and so that the ramp meter can hold red for the car, so that way the bus can safely cross through the ramp. Our sixth strategy is first and last mile connectivity, and we want to improve connectivity to BART, parking rides, reduce parking demand through on-demand mobility, the shared autonomous vehicle, and shared mobility hubs along the corridor. Contra Costa County is actually studying the use of the shared autonomous vehicles and the bike expressway along the Iron Horse Trail. And so we want to encourage, one of the main goals of Innovate 680 is encouraging mode shift. And so in order to create mode shift, we need to make sure that real-time data across all modes is provided to commuters to be able to make real-time decisions. And so what we want to do is develop a new mobility as a service app through Contra Costa 501, and this provide the real travel time savings, the cost savings for each mode of transportation, so that way the user will be able to schedule anything from ride sourcing, ride sharing, car sharing, bike sharing, schedule a transit trip, etc. So Innovate 680 brings multimodal benefits to the 680 corridor. Innovate 680 will reduce travel time by 70% and increase travel speeds along the corridor. And through bus on shoulder and enhancing transit services, we'll actually be able to provide reliability and increased travel time savings to 13 minutes along the corridor. And by having those travel time savings for the buses, it actually creates travel time savings for single occupant vehicles and high occupant vehicles in the corridor, and provide travel time savings for them as well. And through having better throughput and better person throughput along the corridor, we would actually have better improved congestion, better air quality, and also with the implementation of the shared autonomous vehicle and through autonomous vehicle technologies, our roads will be safer and we'll have improved air quality. So the shared autonomous vehicle will be deployed along the BART stations along the corridor and will continue to provide better accessibility, equity by providing better connectivity to jobs and services along the corridor in Contra Costa. So how do we get there? So Innovate 680 has never been done before. So how do we deliver the first connected corridor in the Bay Area? So we take the 7 strategies that will be delivered through 4 projects. And these 4 projects, the Advanced Technology Project will include the Integrated Corridor Management, Coordinated Adaptive Ramp Metering, deployment of the autonomous and connected vehicle strategies, and the Mobility as a Service Contra Costa 501 app. The transit improvements will include enhancing the transit services and improvements to parking rides, and the Express Lane project will be completing the express lanes and address critical weaving and bottleneck locations. And the bus on shoulders will improve the shoulders for traveling buses along the corridor. So our goal is to deliver the Express Lane project, the Bus on Shoulder project, and the Advanced Technology project within the next 5 years. And the auxiliary lanes between Livorno and Rudgear and the braided system ramps at North Main Street to solve those bottlenecks will be delivered by 2025. The strategic plan amendment will reallocate reserves in the I-680 category to provide $40 million in funding for project delivery. The overall program is an estimated $300 million investment in the 680 corridor, and we will need to leverage this funding for matching additional state and federal funds. So we are anticipating that the $40 million will fund planning and environmental for all 4 of the projects and to qualify for additional fund sources. So for SB1, there's a program called Congested Corridor Program, and in order to qualify, we have to have an environmental document. And we just heard this week that Innovate 680 was not selected for the Advanced Transportation Congestion Management Technologies deployment, and we're going to be getting a debrief on that, and it was kind of a big blow. So we're very excited about Innovate 680, and thank you for the opportunity to present Innovate 680 to you this morning.
Questions? Comments? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that report. I'm trying to understand a little bit more about this bus on shoulder proposal. I mean, I think about what your typical shoulder on a freeway can look like. It's usually got pieces of metal and debris and stuff like that. And so I'm concerned about how do you keep those lanes safe, because this debris usually gets swept there one way or the other. Where does it go if then you don't have, you have buses going through there all the time? I also would be interested in learning a little bit more about how you are going to, with buses coming through there. I know there's an education process with the public, but how do you actually, if you're talking about interactions with on-ramps or off-ramps for that matter, how do you manage that problem safely?
So the bus on shoulder it's not a new concept. So in Minnesota, they actually have 300 lane miles of bus on shoulder operating today. And so they've developed guidelines for bus on shoulder, which we would adopt. And so bus on shoulder, buses would only operate in the shoulder when the general purpose lanes are operating at 30 miles an hour or less. And so the bus on shoulders are not, traveling at speeds that would be, I'll say, not safe. And so what would happen is let's say a bus on shoulder actually gets to a stranded vehicle in the shoulder, the bus would just meander slowly into congested lanes and then weave back into the shoulder. And so that's been proven in Minnesota in terms of providing that safety and connectivity for the bus on shoulder. And then the other issue is
those Minnesotans, are much safer than Californians. It's known, it's a demonstrated fact. Maybe. Go on. I'm sorry.
So and then in terms of operations and providing the clean lane, so what we did a bus on shoulder feasibility study. And so what we found is that through that study, we actually have adequate space to provide buses on shoulders. So we need at least a 10-foot lane along the shoulder, or 10-foot shoulder. And then we'll also, through technology, you would actually have someone, and this is proven in Minnesota as well, is that you make sure you have proper maintenance, street sweeping, et cetera, maintenance along the corridor. And then you would also have cameras to make sure there's stranded vehicles, incident management, et cetera, that's happening in the shoulder, or potentially CHP in the shoulder. And so we want to make sure we provide dedicated space for CHP to make sure they can do their business along the corridor. And then through technology, we also have this integrated incident management approach to where we would use technology with the buses, tow trucks, CHP, and that would all be provided through the app to the bus driver to make sure that they know what's going on in the shoulders during operations.
So bus drivers, if they're using this app, will know that 2 miles up there's somebody there and will be looking for it.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Can I add a couple things
Thank
to
you.
that? Yeah. So a couple things. The majority of the lanes, at least what the buses are going down on Interstate 680 southbound is auxiliary lane.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not actually on the shoulder. The number two is when they cross the on-ramps, Tim was talking about adaptive ramp metering. You have automatic vehicle locator systems on the bus, so they'll hold that ramp as the bus passes across the on-ramp. And the off-ramp won't be generally a problem.
Unless people just blow right through those red lights.
Yeah, yes, that's correct.
And I guess not all on-ramps are metered. Or is the future going to be metering at every single on-ramp, whether you like it or not, or whether you think you need it or not?
Yeah, so you would have metering across the entire corridor.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, as far as those on-ramps, Dave is absolutely right. There's an awful lot of people that ignore the red-green cycle on the ramp metering. They just blow on through. I'm assuming we would have a way of having some kind of additional signage so that when it goes red, there's maybe a flashing sign next to it that says bus approaching or something like that, or bus crossing or something to make people go, this is serious, people, there is an obstruction coming your way. Or, something like that, that it would make them take it a little more seriously than they normally do.
Yes, signing, striping, and also using technology to make sure everyone's aware that a bus is coming.
We authorized this when I was actually in the director's office at Caltrans for San Diego, the 805, and it operated for a couple of years with no problems whatsoever. I mean, they have ramp meters down in San Diego. They are Californians, not Minnesotans, and so they are generally more aggressive maybe.
Those are those mellow San Diegans.
And they're starting the second phase again now as we speak.
So, I'm a little skeptical about all of these high-tech plans to squeeze more cars into a freeway corridor. We had a presentation at WICTAC yesterday, last Friday from Caltrans, and they talked about the Interstate 80 Integrated Corridor Mobility Project, and they also talked about the diamond lanes. And apparently there's a federal law that says with those diamond lanes that, and I can't remember the formula, but if the speed drops to some fraction of what it is on the other ones, then it's in conflict with federal law. And a big part of I-80 is way out of compliance. And they talked a little bit about the Integrated Corridor Mobility Project, and most of the people on WICTAC have also become very skeptical about that. They don't believe the metering lights work. They see lines for metering lights backing way up into the adjoining cities and so forth. And, and then I guess the other part of it is that even if you fix, 680 or you fix 80 or 880, you've got all these ancillary routes like the Richmond-Sanderfeld Bridge now, in the morning is backed up for, it's backed up for a mile back from the toll plaza. I probably should have ridden BART out here, but I drive out here. San Pablo Dam Road is bumper to bumper all the way from the El Sobrante commercial area, all the way out to the intersection with 680. And, I think we're all fooling ourselves if we think we can, everybody already agrees we can't pave our way out of this. And I think it's time to accept the fact that you can't innovate your way out of it. The Bay Area has got to start planning and finding a way to finance an effective public transportation system that gets people where they want to go without having to get on roads. And I think until we do that, it's just going to get worse and worse. And I think all this idea that you can innovate your way out of it is just delusion. It's kicking the can down the road.
Thank you, Tom. Any other comments? First of all, this shows what we might be able to do. I don't necessarily know if it's going to all get done. And a lot of this is going to be public education. not many of us are used to a bus on the right-hand side of the lane. So, hey, if we don't explore it, we don't look into it, nothing happens. As Tom has stated, we need to keep tossing these ideas and keep exploring what we may or may not do. So anyway, you have any closing comments?
I would just say that this is, I know we're exploring this, but this is the next generation of integrated corridor management. It's not the I-80 smart corridor. And there's actually some precedents. So in Australia, on the M1, they actually have a company called Vic Roads, and they're a congestion management agency in Australia. And they actually deployed the similar innovative operational strategies. And they're using a very high-tech technology, essentially almost lasers going across the freeway to really get really refined data from the corridor. And they're basically pumping that into the system to really refine and harmonize the congestion along the corridor. And the results, and I can share the link with all of you, but the results actually was able to squeeze an additional 20% of capacity out of the corridor, which is a whole nother lane. So there is precedence of one of the strategies.
So
And we'll have to shift to the other side of the road, right?
it's Minnesotans, it's left-hand side driving. I mean, there's all sorts of potential explanations. I'm not buying either of those. A couple questions, I guess, follow-up for Randy, maybe. One is there going to be another funding cycle to try to get money from the Advanced Transportation Congestion Management deployment?
Yeah, we assume so.
Okay.
Yes.
So we lost once. Do we have an insight? I know we don't really have an insight yet as to why our particular proposal wasn't selected.
No, we'll get feedback from Leader Pelosi's office. So Robert Edmondson's going to give us, he's getting a briefing now by USDOT. And he's the one who shared the news. So it hasn't been announced yet, but we know we didn't get it because he told us.
Yeah.
And so he's getting a briefing, and then we'll get the briefing from him.
Yeah. And do you have any personal, assessments or analysis as far as whether this program can actually make some significant measurable difference in contrast to?
Absolutely. We wouldn't propose something that we thought would make it worse. I think that this has a golden opportunity to kind of change the way we approach how we manage traffic. And that's really what I think Commissioner Butt was trying to get to, is we need to move more people into transit. I mean, that's a fact. But you have to have a road in order for transit to operate on. So there may be some fundamental changes with regulations on where we place the buses in the future and how we give them priority to make sure that the buses are on time, they're easily accessible, and they get you to where you want to go. And then once you get there, you've got a first and last mile hookup, because that's one of the problems. You drive because you want your car so you can go to lunch or do your errands. Well, in the future, if you have the opportunity to do your errands in some other vehicle, you're not going to have a car.
Well, and I'll tell you that this morning I was late getting out the door. I was very fortunate to get here on time, and bus service in Moraga.
Exactly. So we're trying to solve Moragan's problems. The other thing is, what happened on the HOV lanes is when the Pavley bill allowed zero-emission vehicles into the HOV lanes, the state of California falls under federal rules, not the state rules. In the old days, when I worked there, we were under our own rules, and so we were it was never an issue with us about raising occupancy or things like that. But once the Pavley bill let zero-emission vehicles, now we fall under federal rules, and that's when you have the 180 days performance of greater than 85% of the speeds over 35 miles an hour, and that includes weather, accidents, and all that other things that can happen. And so one of the things that we haven't talked about is how do we get the violators out of that HOV lane? Because a lot of the people running in front of your community are violators. They're single occupant because there's not enough enforcement. And so we need to figure out ways to do that as well.
Well, there was a guy from the Highway Patrol there, and basically he said, we just don't have enough resources to do it. We can't do it. We can't enforce it. And so, yeah, you're right. That's a great point. They were talking about something like 40% of the people who use the HOV lanes are violators. And it's very frustrating. You don't see solutions out there. You just see the Highway Patrol. The guy basically said, we're not going to do it. Not our problem.
So in the express
Very
lane,
frustrating.
and it is, and I used to work for the state, and I can feel your frustration. The issue will be when the express lanes are implemented, they're going to, if you bond against future revenue of that express lane, you have to ensure the investors that you're not going to have violators. And so part of the revenue stream is to pay for enhanced enforcement to get those violators out of that lane. And I think that's going to change the way we approach. If it works here on Interstate 680, which I'm assuming it will, otherwise you're going to get rid of me, then when it does work, we'll put it on Interstate 80 and ultimately on State Route 4, and you'll have less violators because you'll be paying for that enforcement to make sure that the revenue is coming back to pay for enhanced bus service, for example, in the future.
And I would say technology is actually evolving to where you're going to have automated occupancy detection so that you can enforce occupancy in the express lanes and managed lanes.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things about the express lanes is the congestion pricing is going to help make sure that the HOV works at optimum capacity. And as it gets full of carpools, the others will be priced out of it. And that's the way it's intended to work. The other thing is, Randy's absolutely right. The enforcement is a part of the package for the express lanes. It's not like the HOV lanes where we sometimes get overtime folks from CHP that, you know, based on availability, they're there to enforce. This is actually part of the package that will be required. The other thing we're looking at that Tim is talking about for technology is the ability, we hope before long, to do infrared kinds of enforcement where you could actually detect how many people are in the vehicle as they go through and cite them automatically through license plate readers and things like that, where you won't actually have to have an officer right there. And, you know, it's still got some hurdles to get through, but the technology is there now. It's the legal issues that we have to surmount to get that done. But I think most of us would agree that would be a huge improvement to make sure that we enforce that, because folks figure if they've passed one cop, there isn't going to be another one. Well, guess what? There will be something watching.
All right. Moving right along. 15-0. Oh, by the way, thank you for the presentation. Now, are you going to show this to the board?
Yes.
Okay. Try to remember some of these questions because hopefully you made a list.
I did.
Oh, okay. Oh, you did too?
You can listen to the tape.
Yeah, good. Listen to that tape. All right. 15-0. Consideration to reinstitute Salary and Benefits Committee.
Good morning, APC Chair Taylor. My name is Randy Carlton. I'll be bringing this item forward. It's an administrative matter. About 3.5 years ago, the authority approved the salary and benefit compensation package for authority employees. That 3-year time frame ends June 30th, 2018. Staff would like to get out ahead of this a bit and do some pre-planning, start looking at some of the questions that we want to ask ourselves as we look at our compensation plan going forward. We discussed this with the board before. The time frame was 3+ years ago, and the board expressed a consensus that looked for a bit of a hybrid between the APC and the PC. One of the comments was, well, if the APC reviews all of these compensation policies, it perhaps leaves other commissioners that are not on the APC somewhat out of the mix in terms of preparing that policy. So in answer to that, we created an ad hoc committee called Salary and Benefits Committee. It had 5 members on the committee. Staff worked with the committee, worked with the consultant, to develop a compensation plan, and with that committee's recommendation to the board, it was approved. So now staff is bringing that concept back, asking if the APC would like to make this recommendation to the board. That would give direction to the direction to the authority chair to facilitate, a selection of 5 members for the Salary and Benefit Committee. So that's essentially what's being asked of you today, is to, consider this, and if so, make a recommendation to the board for forming this committee.
I guess the question I ask, it would come, what you're really asking for is for this ad hoc committee to come from the actual board? Volunteers or? No.
We're asking the chair to facilitate, a selection, and it would come from the board of 5 members, representative of the board, not necessarily the 5 members of the APC.
Comments?
I've got to leave, so to facilitate this, I will move it. This will go to the full board, and at that point, I guess there will be some discussion about who makes up the committee. There will be a call for volunteers and so on and so forth. So,
I would second that with a suggestion only, that it might be the chair, the vice chair, the chair of the 2 committees, and somebody else. And that, given the current composition, would split it up pretty evenly.
That's somewhat consistent with how it was formed previously.
yeah, that's
That-
okay.
Okay, you okay with that motion? Okay. I have a first, I have a second. We'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. We move into chair's comments and reports. I got a question, and I don't know who it goes to, whether it would go future, Randy, but I'm very concerned, and I'm not quite sure how to go about it in the sense of if all cars turn electric, cities do not have stations for getting these cars on the road and keeping them on the road, et cetera. Will there be federal funding? Will there be state funding? And then how do cities get the information of who's going to do what to set up what?
So we're going down a path of creating a master plan, a master electric vehicle charging station plan for Contra Costa County, which includes the cities. And we're working, Supervisor Joya sits on California Air Resources Board, and he was talking about some funding that's available from the Volkswagen settlement that may be available to help us in our endeavor of not only doing the plan, but implementing this grid, the electric grid, and make sure the charging stations are in the right place. My understanding is, for example, Tesla is looking at placing 5 superchargers out at the Macy's parking lot. And so I think that we need to be prepared in Contra Costa County because we're modeling the future, and our models show we need a 58% fleet turnover to zero-emission vehicles in order to make our 80% reduction in greenhouse gases by the year 2050. And so if we're going to do that, we have to have the infrastructure in place in order to make that happen. Otherwise, you're going to have electric cars and no charging stations. It's not going to work. And so Peter's got the lead on the master plan. We'll start that, and then we'll work with Supervisor Joy and others to try to find the funding to start deploying this technology.
Okay, because this would make a great topic at mayor's conference when we get info and
Okay.
because we need
Mr.
to.
Chair?
Yes.
Let me just tag on to that. It seems to me that we should also be working, and you may already be doing this, working with the various energy companies, whether they're part of a energy coalition or whether it's PG&E, to include them in this master plan to, as I was saying to Bob this morning, it seems to me that as we go forward, they're going to have to work with the automobile companies to make a package of the sale of an electric automobile to include the installation of home charging stations. And for those who have solar, that makes tons of sense to install charging stations at individual homes and then put them in multiple unit complexes as well. So there's got to be some kind of a package here where we accommodate this.
So we had a plan that we formulated maybe a year and a half ago with the city of Pittsburgh. City of Pittsburgh has its own power plant. And the idea was that if you buy an electric vehicle and you reside in the city of Pittsburgh, they give you a package, and the package says, here are the list of those installers of the Type 2 charger that have gone through the PG&E charging installation program, so they get trained. PG&E had agreed at the time, and I think they still will, to come out and audit your home to make sure it'll take a 35-amp circuit breaker and the wires will hold so they don't burn your house down. And then number 3 is the city will do the inspections for free, because they want to try to support this grid. This whole notion of we need more charging stations Type 2, because like a guy like me, I'm going to go put that in my garage and I may burn my house down because I'm not a real good electrician, rather than pay somebody. But they don't want you to do that. We don't want you to do that. And so that was the concept. PG&E has a program as well. At the time, they want to do 20 stations at a time. And I think they fit in very well with this kind of master plan concept, and we'll get PG&E involved, and maybe even Marin Clean, MCE. Yes.
Okay. Let's see. That was my comment. Questions? Commissioners? Comments? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm also serving as the Contra Costa Mayor's Conference appointment to the Park Advisory Committee at East Bay Regional Park District. And at our last PAC meeting, there was public comment and also a lot of pushback from members of that advisory committee about the fact that there was no bike ped, route built into the Highway 4 680 interchange improvements. That they can't. Apparently, they thought that was a mistake, and apparently it's because it wasn't part of the project description that got studied with an EIR. And I encouraged them to reach out to CCTA to express their concerns and, perhaps try to make it a project for the future. I told them that I didn't think there was anybody on this board that would be opposed to such a project. I mean, it's certainly consistent with our mission. I just thought I would pass that along for your FYI. And I don't know whether you've had anybody actually contact you, Randy, or anyone else on the staff, because in the last 2-3 weeks since that meeting took place.
Yeah, I would joke that, well, this is the first time we've heard that, but it's really not the first time we heard that. And Susan really is our kind of our focal point on it. You want to add something really quickly on that topic?
We have been in communication with them, and we've actually talked to the Park District to learn about their plans. So there's connections kind of on either side, and so the Park District's actually...
There's a gap.
Well, it traverses through, and we talked to the Park District about what they are working on currently, which would be to come along the Walnut Creek Channel. And we have provisions under the bridge that they would be able to do that.
How about west to east?
The west to east is what they're also completing. So we've kind of looked at it. There's different areas, and it could be that it could be a future project. But with the current phase that we're looking at, it's really not part of it because we're not really doing the directions that they're interested in doing.
Have you heard from the advocacy group? They call themselves the something peddlers, I think, or whatever it is?
Yes, we have.
You have. Okay.
And I've talked to them, and we've looked at maps, and we've discussed it.
I would love to see, because it was all very vaguely presented at the PAC meeting, I'd love to see some mapping on that so
Okay.
I can be more intelligent the next time I attend a PAC meeting. Let's talk about that offline.
All right, we'll do.
Right.
I'm
Thank you.
sure they'll be at the TransPAC meeting next week because they've been there several times already.
And they had said to that they got nowhere with you guys. So I mean,
Well, I told them there actually is a route that goes along the surface streets that are parallel
Yeah.
to the freeway. Right now, they can do that. Is it striped for a bike path? No, but it's not super busy
their
either.
goal was something
They
dedicated.
want a direct lane that parallels the freeway.
Right.
I understand.
Okay. Thank you.
So to add on to that, we understand that sometimes they feel like they're not getting heard, and so Tim has set up, we're going to have a quarterly meeting with the bike advocates to make sure they're in tune with all the projects, so they get an update on the projects, they look at the geometry, they know where they stand as far as delivery is concerned. So we're going to try to lessen this where they keep hitting every agency in Contra Costa County on the same project, asking the same question after the analysis has already been done. And so we'll try to do that, and then we'll try to be more forthright in making sure that the board is educated on, where we stand on these projects and what's the status as far as bicycles are concerned.
Bike path,
would be helpful.
but bike in particular.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Executive staff comments? We're done? Adjourned.
Nice meeting you all.
Thursday, November 2nd.
So the real enforcement mechanism here needs to be drone lasers.